Hello and welcome to this revision session, which is looking at Frankenstein, and we're going to be looking in detail at the character of Victor Frankenstein. We've broken this session up into a couple of different parts. With it being the first revision session we're doing, we're just going to talk a little bit about how we revise in English literature and the stages of revision. Before we're going to look at an essay plan on Victor Frankenstein, and then in the next session we do in literature we're going to look at an essay plan for the creature, and you'll see why I've chosen those two characters as we get into the session. As you can see, what we want to try and do when you are revising a text, the idea is that you are moving away from the various sections of the text, the various chapters, the 170 pages that make up Frankenstein, and you are moving towards creating your own essay plan on the key characters and themes that come up. You could create one on every single character that comes up, but what you're going to see when we look at the questions in a minute, that quite often they are about the same kind of characters. And the idea is that you should be going into your literature exam for the question on Frankenstein, on Macbeth, on power and conflict poetry, whatever the question is, knowing what you want to say if a certain character comes up. And so what you need to do, and this is why we get students looking at lit charts, which are available on our Frog site, why we get students buying the revision guides, you need to first of all know what happens in Frankenstein, and then you need to be able to turn your knowledge into a coherent essay plan, and we'll look at that in a minute. I'm just going to spend about 5 minutes talking through this document with you, and then we'll look at some things that you might find quite useful to help you out. First of all, this is a breakdown of what you need to know, how you will know as an individual if you've completed that stage, and what you can actually do to complete this stage and where you can get help. And we go stage one, so you've got to do all these things, and then all these things. We will do some of them in class, and we have done some of them already in class as well. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. First stage is fundamental knowledge. Now you are going to get an exam question on Macbeth, Frankenstein, the power and conflict poetry, and two unseen poetry questions. You need to know, let's just focus on Frankenstein for today, who the key characters are in Frankenstein. That might be you writing a little couple of lines about who they are, for instance, as a bit of revision at this stage. You need to be able to explain the plot of Macbeth and Frankenstein. That's not a case maybe of rereading the novel. You probably haven't got time to do that now, but it will be a case of getting a plot summary. Asking your English teacher if they've got a plot summary for you. Looking on our Frog site, which we'll make available through Microsoft Teams, so you can see all the revision resources on there. It could be a case of doing other things as well. You need to explain what happens in the poetry. That doesn't apply in poetry, so that's just for Frankenstein. Read plot summaries so you know what happens. It does say watch accurate film versions of Frankenstein. There aren't any versions of Frankenstein that are entirely true to the events of the novel. So it's a very difficult kind of text in that respect. Macbeth, there are one or two scenes missing, but on the whole it's kind of pretty much accurate. But for Frankenstein that doesn't exist. So read a plot summary and remind yourself of what happens. Storyboard it if you want. There's the letters, 24 chapters, and Walton's continuation at the end. So just storyboard what happens in each one as a bit of basic revision at this point. Look on Frog, which will be available through Teams in your channels. So if you go into your class, your English teachers will share those links with you. This is where the things that you might have bought, revision guides, CGP revision guides. So the Frankenstein one you saw earlier on, I've got here. We'll look at that in a minute. Flipsco cue cards, I haven't got those to hand, but they are basically revision cards to save you making them yourselves. But it is quite useful to get these things and turn them into other things you'll see in a minute. Watch our English department videos that I'll put together, and Mr. Bruff revision videos as well, because a combination of myself and Mr. Bruff and some of his resources, they go through some of the things you will need to know in a lot of detail. So you should have done that by January 2021. When you are coming back after Christmas, let's say, maybe in January you might have a few lessons there, you should know all this, because we have covered this in Year 9 and Year 10. So things that we've done, and it's just a case of maybe you've missed a lesson here or there, maybe you're not too sure about one or two things and you just want a bit of a reminder, but you need to be filling in these gaps, because in class at the moment we're going to be studying Macbeth, which is going to take us through to this point, and we are going to be studying English language as well. We haven't got time to do this for you. This is what you need to do as a starting point. And then what we will start to do is develop your understanding. And again, if you can do this by the end of January, this will be quite good. It's your key themes in Frankenstein. You've looked at characters, now what are the key themes? Can you explain what the key themes are in Frankenstein and which characters show these themes? And you do that because of what the question will look like, and I'll show you that question in a moment. Can you analyse 3 to 4 quotations per theme or per character? They can be the same quotations, and we'll talk about quotations later on, because it tends to be something that students tend to really worry about, and actually I would argue you know quite a lot of quotations, but what you don't know is how to use those quotations going into the exam. And can you explore 2 to 3 wider ideas or points of context per theme or character? This tends to be a bit of a weakness across the country, but particularly something we've seen here, where students tend to just give us a one-line history lesson. And the idea is you need to explore context. So you're not just saying, for Frankenstein, for instance, Victor Frankenstein wants to play God by making the creature. You're exploring why he wants to play God. What are his motives? Why does Mary Shelley have him playing God, for instance? And exploring takes space in your essay. You've then got to make essay plans on key characters and themes in Frankenstein. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at an essay plan for Victor Frankenstein and making one. And you can make essay plans, obviously, for power and conflict poetry, but this next stage is you making the essay plans that you are actually going to use in the exam. So it's a case of, right, I'm going to get a question on Victor Frankenstein. How am I going to answer that question? Well, I'm going to answer it using the essay plan I've made in my revision time. And that might be an essay plan you've done with me in these revision sessions. It might be an essay plan you do independently. It might be an essay plan you do in class. It might be something you've already used for a KIP or for a trial exam and you got a really good mark and you don't need to do another essay plan. But it's just something you can put in an easy format so you can have it to hand, you can stick it up in your bedroom, you can take it around with you and you can revise that, because that's what you need now. You need to move away from the 170 pages of Frankenstein as a novel to how can I get my knowledge about Victor Frankenstein onto a side of A4? How can I get my knowledge of the creature onto a side of A4? And then the next stage is exam practice. We've done some of this when we do KIPs and trial exams, but can you answer past paper questions on Frankenstein in time conditions? And can you develop your analysis to the standard it needs to be? Can you tick off all those skills we want you to do? So we would expect you, this is where students tend to panic, they tend to try and do this first. They tend to think, right, I've got to write an essay on Victor Frankenstein. You can't write a good essay on Victor Frankenstein if you don't know who he is and if you don't know what themes he represents, because you just can't explore the question in the depth you need to. So focus on these two things first. If you've got time at home, your revision is going to be filling in the gaps from when we've looked at these things first time around. And that might have been because you maybe missed a lesson for whatever reason. It might be perhaps due to lockdown, and we will look at some things in more detail. Certainly we're going to look at power and conflict poetry, but for Frankenstein, fill in those gaps, because we've done Frankenstein in year 9 and year 10, so we're not going to have as much time to spend on it as other things, so it's a chance for you to fill in those gaps. And ask us as well, ask me if you're not sure about anything. Send me a message on Teams, send me an email, or just come and find me, and if I've got time I will go through and answer that with you. So that's what we need you to revise, and this is the same for any literature text as well, but we will kind of see this as we go through these videos as well. Now, what I'm going to show you, we're not going to be doing anything about fundamental knowledge today. If you are struggling, these CGP guides are brilliant. They really are. I know a lot of you have got these already, and I'm just going to talk through this. This is a bit of a shameless plug, but I use these for my GCSE exams. You've got some introduction of Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. You've got a list of the characters. So if you don't know who's who, then they're all here. And we tend to focus in detail on Victor and the monster. They are the two main characters, and that's why we're going to do an essay plan on each of those. Robert Walton could come up, Clerval could come up, Elizabeth could come up, Alphonse could come up. But if they did come up, I have put together an essay plan that you might want to use. But focus your revision on Frankenstein and the monster, because they are the two main characters. You may get any character in an extract, but to enable any student to explore the novel in detail, you're going to have perhaps a question on Victor or the monster. You've got a summary of all the chapters and all the letters. You've got some context here, some of these big ideas we're talking about. You've got some practice questions. Now, these aren't the same as your GCSE practice questions. There are some of those in the back. They're just questions designed to help your understanding, and they're things that we've covered in detail. And what I will get you to look at here is if you start to look at the characters here, we've got character profile, we've got Victor Frankenstein. What you've actually got here is the start of an essay plan on Victor Frankenstein. You've got an obsessive desire for knowledge. He can be self-absorbed. He's surrounded by people who love him. He rejects them. He becomes weaker, and he's deeply troubled at the end of his life. You've got the basis of an essay plan there. It's not a particularly detailed essay plan. You've also got some quotations here that you can use, and we'll start to talk about that now. So what you are going to get in your exam is you are going to get an essay question. We've put some of these booklets together, just so you know your exam will be slightly different this year. With COVID, they've changed things around a little bit. So you won't have Frankenstein on the same exam paper as Macbeth. It'll be a separate exam paper, and Macbeth will be with unseen poetry. But what we've done is we've put these essay questions together. Everything in this booklet, we've got some of these spare in the English department. We have got it available online. Everything in this booklet is the same for your exam. These are some Macbeth questions, so it might be useful for that. But if I go to the first Frankenstein question, this sample question, and we go through, these are roughly speaking in order from the exam board as well. So there's a couple of them on here. Anything we've had from the exam board, and we'll keep adding to this. How far does Shelley present the monster as a victim to be pitied, with an extract from the end of the novel? So this is an exam paper that AQA have used in the past. Monster as a victim to be pitied, and the end of the novel. Chapter 20, the monster is an evil character, and chapter 20, so close to the end. Frankenstein's monster is a victim of society's fear and prejudice, so the monster is a victim with chapter 16. Shelley suggests that Victor is wrong to create the monster, so you've got there, is Victor morally wrong? It's a question on Victor, and chapter 4. You've got Shelley presents the importance of love and acceptance to society. Now that's quite a tough question on paper, with chapter 15, but within that you should be starting to think, oh actually hold on, no it's not, because nobody accepts or loves the creature, so I'm probably going to talk about him, and you talk about maybe the love that Victor's had from his family, and you've got an essay there for that as well. And that's the last one we've got. There are some more that we can add to this as well, but we do use some of them in class. So what you're starting to see is a lot of the questions are on, or you can bring back to Victor, and you can bring back to the creature as well. And if I was to kind of take this as a bit of a summary, your question will always look something like this. Starting with this extract, explore how far Shelley presents a character as a theme, or as representing a theme. So how far does Shelley present Victor Frankenstein as an arrogant scientist? How far does Shelley present the creature as a victim? You've seen quite a lot. Write about how the character or theme is presented by Shelley in the extract, because they will always give you an extract, and how far Shelley presents character or theme in the novel as a whole. This is my really rough version, because it's just going to look like this. Whatever you do, you're going to get an extract from the beginning, the middle, or the end of the novel. So they are going to give you something. And if they give you something, if they give you an extract on the beginning, let's say, you can do 1 to 2 analysis paragraphs on the extract, and then you can do kind of, let's say, 2 to 3 analysis elsewhere. If you've done 2 analysis, let's say you give you an extract from the beginning and you do 2 quotation analysis paragraphs on the beginning, and then you do the middle and the end, that will be fine as an essay. We'll say kind of 2 to 3 and 2 to 3 here, but sometimes you won't be able to write 4 to 6 paragraphs. We're kind of going for quality of analysis rather than you just writing 6 paragraphs that are tiny. We want you to analyse in detail and go into context in detail that takes time. And sometimes you might write 4 paragraphs, and that would be absolutely fine if it was just, as long as you've gone into depth on some of those themes. If you get the middle, it's exactly the same. You do 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3 elsewhere. But obviously your elsewhere would then be, you might go back to the beginning and then you kind of go forward to the end. The end would be quite a nice one to get, because you do 1 to 2 on the ending, and then you think about how have we got up to this point, what's happened in the middle and the beginning that's led us to this ending. Just as a quick rule of thumb, in every single trial exam and KIP, I have seen very, very few students talk effectively about the ending of Frankenstein. I would really like in your exam you to get an extract from the ending. ideally right at the end and to do with the creature. But you need to mention the ending. If you've got the beginning, talk about the ending, because everything that Mary Shelley does in Frankenstein leads up to that ending. You know, Victor's kind of grand family life at the start of Frankenstein, and let's say the creature's beginning, you know, his kind of complete rejection, set the tone for the end of the novel. Because if it's not for Victor's brilliant family life at the start of the novel, then by the time we get to the ending and he has this complete fall from grace and he's dead alone on a boat in the middle of the North Pole, you know, this complete fall from grace with his family being murdered throughout the novel, this ending isn't as effective if it's not for the beginning. And you need to mention that. It's structural analysis, and also it's showing the examiner that you understand what happens at the end. But again, going back to what we were saying at the start, you need to understand what happens in the novel to do that. You can't talk about the ending effectively. You can't analyse the meaning of the ending if you're not fully comfortable what the ending is. So be filling those gaps in as well. So that is our kind of essay plan. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at, let's take this question stem, starting with this extract, explore how far Shelley presents character as a theme. We're just going to do Victor. Within this essay, I'm going to discuss that Victor is, let's say, an arrogant scientist, and also that he isn't an arrogant scientist. If I got the question was how far Shelley presents Victor as an egotistical character, me talking about him being egotistical and not egotistical would answer that question. The fact that they use the words how far in this question is getting you, with whether you like it or not, and to get a good mark, to get your kind of grade 7s, 8s and 9s to answer this question, to evaluate this statement. They're giving you a statement, if you like. Shelley presents the Victor as an arrogant scientist, and you need to argue whether she does or she doesn't. And she kind of does throughout the novel, but you can kind of argue that. You can mention other characters in that. You might want to mention the creature, for instance, because the creature is a character who isn't an arrogant character. I would argue if you've got a question on Victor, you can't not mention the creature as his kind of binary opposite, and the same the other way around. If you've got a question on the creature, you're probably going to mention Victor as his neglectful father who brings about what happens to the creature in the end as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our knowledge into an essay plan. Okay, so what you will have is, what we would like you to produce is your own essay plan. And we're going to look at Victor Frankenstein today, and we'll do the creature in the next session. And then obviously you can start to produce your own for minor characters. I need to say two things at this point. First of all, you've got to show that you understand what happens in the beginning, the middle and the end of the novel. What happens throughout the novel. We're less bothered where that kind of comes. We're less bothered, for instance, if, you know, you might have two quotations from near the middle, let's say, and one might be the beginning. You know, the creature's beginning doesn't happen till kind of round about chapter 5 in the novel. So obviously we're not being strict here with where it comes from, but you'll get given an extract from a certain point in the novel. So within that, you're going to have to talk about the beginning. You're going to have to talk about the middle. And you're going to have to talk about the end. And there is a box free here, which is probably where you're going to have to write 1 or 2 paragraphs about the extract. And I'm going to leave this box blank because I'm not going to deal with an extract this lesson. I'm going to give you the other things that you would need. But what I would get you to do is look at an extract from Frankenstein and perhaps write 1 or 2 paragraphs of your own here that you would mention if you get the extract. So there will always be space in these essay plans because you don't know what you're going to get until you get into the exam. But you look at that extract and you think, right, okay, it's Victor Frankenstein. It's from the start when he's talking about his happy childhood. That might be what I've written in the beginning, so I'll just I won't use that, but I'll use 2 things from the extract instead, and I'll talk in the middle and the end in more detail as well. When it comes to quotations, I would always get you to learn quotations that you feel comfortable using. There is no such thing as a magic quotation to unlock all the marks in Frankenstein. All an examiner wants to see is that you can analyse language in detail. And so it's not about what quotation you learn ever, it's about what you can actually do with that quotation. Try and remember, where humanly possible, short quotations. And also remember that they give you an extract in the exam which you can analyse in detail as well. So it might be that you analyse, let's say the extract you get is from the start of Frankenstein. You really like the start of Frankenstein because you're comfortable with it, you understand what's going on, and you analyse in detail. And we're going to look at a quotation, their plaything and their idol, in a minute as well. Let's say you analyse that in a lot of detail. That's absolutely fine, because your middle and end paragraphs might not be as large then, but your analysis in detail is in that one paragraph. As long as you do it once or twice in your essay, that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write in 3 different colours. I will pick a blue, just running out of colours. I'll pick a nice little pink here as well, and we will go for, really struggling here, I will go for purple as well. And what I'm going to do with my blue, I'm going to write down what Mary Shelley does at the start. And this is where your revision comes in. This is where you are welcome to do one of 2 things. Copy my ideas down for this, or do your own. I would always encourage you to do your own, and I'll show you this as an example. And what you can do is you can use your revision books, your character profile of Victor Frankenstein, your revision guide, any notes you've got, to put one of these together for yourself. Because what you're going to do, if you just do mine, you are going to learn my essay plan for Victor Frankenstein and why I've put it together, which is absolutely fine. You can do that and get a good mark in the exam. But you might have other quotations you would like to analyse, and I never take offence at that. You know, I just show you what you need to do in the depth you need to do it. Once you've done this, this should have a very detailed essay plan. So when you're revising, you're trying to write these in 45 minutes and then have a go at analysing an extract yourself, and that's where you'll probably need our question booklet as well to do this extract part as well. So Victor Frankenstein at the beginning. What does Mary Shelley do at the start of Frankenstein? Well, at the start of Frankenstein, right at the start, you've got Victor on the boat, he's on the ice cap, he's on the verge of death, he's urging Walton to just be careful but also to carry on with his mission. But I'm not really interested in that because it doesn't really tell me anything about what Mary Shelley's trying to do with his character. What I am interested in is very early Victor and what he's presented in, let's say, chapter 1, for instance. He's presented as, or we'll have kind of Shelley presents Victor as a spoilt child. And I don't like spoilt as a term. He is spoilt, but let's say overindulged. Shelley presents Victor as an overindulged child. He is overindulged, and that comes from our quotation we'll see in a minute. And she does this to foreshadow his egotistical behaviour as a scientist later in the novel. So what I'm doing with my point there, what does Mary Shelley do? She presents Victor as an overindulged child at the start because later on he behaves as an egotistical scientist as well. And how does she do that? Well, the quotation I've chosen for this, there are loads of them, is their plaything and their idol. Now, what I'm going to try and do is get away from writing a formal essay plan for this here. I'm just going to make some notes on this in a bit more, around my kind of sheet here so you can see. I'll focus in this in a bit more depth as well. So their plaything and their idol is the quotation I've chosen. I've chosen this quotation purely because of the 2 nouns used here as well. So we've got a noun, plaything, and we've got a noun, idol, and we've got 2 possessive pronouns here as well. Because Victor belongs to them, and this idea of belonging is quite important in treating people as objects in Frankenstein. Let's have a little look. First of all, idol. An idol like this refers to a godlike figure as well. So it's this idea that Victor's parents see him as some kind of god. And then obviously in later life he sees himself as a god. So this idea that because his parents see him as some kind of god, some kind of godlike figure. As a child, he then grows up to view himself as a godlike figure as well. And then this idea that actually thinking about this in more depth, this is where a lot of you, that's a valid point that we're making, but think about these things in a bit more detail. This idea that he wants the creature to idolize him. I'm embedding the word there, I'm using the quotation in a different way. Idolize him, but rejects him. And that's the opposite to his own parents. So Victor, if you like, does the exact opposite that his parents did to him. He wants the creature to idolize him, but he rejects the creature, which is the opposite to the love shown by his own parents. You could talk about plaything as well. You know, this idea that plaything here, Victor kind of, if you like, Victor's parents see him as a plaything. And you've got the word thing there, this idea, it's kind of almost, if you like, they've had Victor as a child for some form of amusement. And so adult Victor sees life, because he learns this from his parents, as a plaything. You know, adult Victor grows up to almost see life as his kind of giant chemistry set, because his parents see him as a plaything as well. And what you've got here as well, just thinking about context and kind of wider ideas as well, you've got this idea of Victor playing God. I'll do this in orange at the bottom, it might not be particularly easy to see. Victor playing God. He is an arrogant, an egotistical scientist. He's an arrogant scientist. As he wants to be idolized for scientific discovery, but he doesn't accept any of the consequences. So what I've got there is a quotation. I've got a few, I haven't even analysed there the two possessive pronouns in any depth there. I've analysed plaything, I've analysed idle, I've got my point, my evidence. And if I was to write this up, I'm looking at quite a lengthy paragraph. The context I've mentioned, the idea is this idea of playing God, and I haven't really got enough space to go into depth here, but you'd be expected to elaborate that in an essay. This idea that Victor as a child is overindulged, he's over kind of loved by his parents, and that leads him to become arrogant in later life as well. He's shown too much love as a child, and that then means that when he grows up, he doesn't know any boundaries. He doesn't know any moral or ethical boundaries, and this is kind of worth writing in. I'm just going to go over the top here. He knows no boundaries because he doesn't have any. And so Mary Shelley includes this kind of this quotation to show that, you know, he is going to be like an arrogant scientist at the time, an arrogant Enlightenment era scientist who does unethical experiments because he doesn't know those boundaries as well. Now, we've got that there as our beginning quotation. And I think if we're moving on to the middle of Frankenstein, one of the things I like to look at for the middle is this idea of the creation. I know it's kind of chapter 5, but then pretty soon after that, we've got Victor going back to visit his family. We've got the moments with William and Justine, which are interesting examples of Victor not taking responsibility. And then we've got the creature's narrative. So if we talk about just thinking about Victor at the kind of middle, Shelley presents Victor in the middle of Frankenstein. And she presents Victor as a kind of an arrogant scientist we've alluded to here. So we've mentioned he's an arrogant scientist. He's no longer this overindulged child. He's an arrogant scientist. But also as a tragic hero. You know, it's the start of the novel, and he's not a hero in the kind of the good sense of the word. He's a stereotypically tragic character, a hero in the sense that he dies and everyone loyal to him dies, because of his hamartia. And hamartia is basically a flaw in his character, something he can't do. So an arrogant scientist, Shelley presents Victor as an arrogant scientist. His hamartia is to reject the creature and to refuse to take responsibility. And that's his hamartia, because this leads to his tragic downfall. And you can even put this in here. This leads to his tragic downfall. If Victor was to own up to it's creating the creature, if Victor was to love the creature, put his own arrogance behind him and think, right, do you know what? This hasn't gone the way I planned it, but I'm going to look after this creature. I'm going to love it as if it's my own. You know, we're going to go and get a nice house somewhere and live together. Then none of the bad events of Frankenstein happen. You know, his family might even have forgiven him. They might even have accepted him. He might even have been acknowledged as a great scientist. But he does none of this. He kind of hides. He has various or Shelley has him have various fits to avoid taking responsibility. And not only is he rejects the creature here, because when he creates the creature, he's filled with a sense of breathless horror and disgust. And they filled his heart, but my heart here. Breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. So this is the quotation I've used. And I've used this quotation because I just like the simple ideas of breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. They're easy things to learn, breathless horror and disgust, and we can talk about this. This idea that he feels this sense of horror and disgust. So we get to see this sense of horror and disgust here as well. Again, two kind of simple nouns as well, horror and disgust. And we see them because of Victor's narratives. Victor's narrative is first person. So Victor is the person telling the story of the creature's creation. And we see it through Victor, and we see the kind of his hatred for the creature. And this is what you're quite good at. You're very good at picking out a word and doing kind of connotations of that. You know, the disgust that fills that. This is extreme hatred. Victor's breath, his breathless horror. His breath is taken away by how evil and how hideous the creature is as well. And it's this idea that actually his breathless horror and disgust, extreme hatred, is all because of the appearance of the creature. It's all to do with how the creature appears. But actually, whose fault is it the creature appears the way he does? It's Victor's fault. Victor creates him. So Victor is actually responsible. Victor creates the creature. Victor is the one who put him together, and Victor is the one who kind of animates him. So it's actually Victor's fault that the creature looks the way he does. So this breathless horror and disgust, it's like that what did you expect moment. There's almost this sense of irony here as well. What did you expect was going to happen when you dug up body parts of human beings and use them to try and create human life as well? So I'd analyse this idea of disgust as well, this idea of horror, and this idea, is he disgusted, is it horror, is this disgust at the creature, or is it at Victor's failure? And what I'm trying to do here is get you to think about, you don't have to do alternative interpretation. Some quotations, some words don't have alternative interpretations, but they have deeper meanings. Is Victor disgusted at the creature here? Oh God, you look hideous. Or is it the fact that Victor's actually failed? He's disgusted with himself as well, which is kind of part of his, part of his arrogance. He's disgusted because he has failed there, and he refuses to take responsibility on the back of this as well. And this idea that we talk about the sense of horror, let's look at our kind of context and idea. This idea that the horror there as well, this rejection, horror of the creature. Is this the creature's fault? Do we blame? I know the question is going to be on Victor. This is Victor's essay plan, but at the end of the day, it's Victor's fault that the creature is the way he is. Is this the creature's fault that he is horrifically, his appearance is horrific, or Victor's? And does Victor's treatment, does Victor's refusal to take responsibility, does Victor's treatment excuse the creature's behaviour? Now, what I've done is I've asked two questions there, and what you would need to do is answer those two questions in your contextual point. There is no right answer for this. What I would say, getting you to think about context in a little bit more detail here, is this idea it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what I mean by that is that if I was to go to a student and say, oh, he's a horror, you are a horrific student to teach. Your behaviour is horrific, your work is horrific. What we mean by self-fulfilling prophecy is if you label somebody as something, they will become that whether you like it or not. So if I call somebody horrific, if we call the creature, a monster, a wretch, a horror, and here, don't get me wrong, Victor is talking about the horror of the appearance, but thinking this in detail, then the creature is bound to become horrifically behaved. The creature is bound to turn evil because of Victor's treatment of him there as well. And that's something you would need. Never ask the question in your exam. Some people do this. I've seen it a lot in students' essays. You shouldn't be putting question marks in a literature essay, but what you should be doing is using those questions and using the space that would take to answer those questions. From what I think that you can understand the creature's behaviour. It helps us to come to an element of understanding, but you can never forgive. It's not an excuse that you've had a difficult upbringing in the creature's case here. It's not an excuse. Shelley's not trying to present it as an excuse, but what she's trying to say is that there are people in society who have suffered, who do continue to suffer, and it's a result of other people's behaviour, not so much their own behaviour. And this ties into this idea of revolution as well. This idea that the poorest in society, like the creature, are often rejected. And if you like, no one takes responsibility for them. And that then leads to their own downfall. That leads to the tragic downfall. The French Revolution, for instance, which we look at, this idea that the working classes and the middle classes got together to overthrow the royal family in France, happened because no one in that royal family was willing to take responsibility for the common person. Just as Victor's not willing to look after the creature, and that's his hamartia leading to his death and the death of his family, which is a feature of tragedy. In society, if those people who are charged with looking after everyone don't look after everyone, then eventually there will be a time when they are overthrown and they are met with justice as well. And that's often by those people forming revolution and overthrowing them. And so we'll go to the end as well. And you need to talk about the end. We mentioned this earlier on. People don't tend to do it in enough detail. The end of Frankenstein. Our question's on Victor, so let's focus on Victor. Victor's death is used by Shelley as a moral punishment for his actions throughout the play, throughout the novel. Now, Victor's death is used by Shelley as a moral punishment for his actions throughout the novel. Basically, what we're saying, and this is quite a contextual point we're going to be making, is that Victor dies because he messes around with the laws of nature. What's quite interesting is there's a couple of different quotations you can use, but obviously it's Walton who reports on Victor's death at the end. And Walton refers to him as a glorious spirit. And just so you're clear, just because Walton says this quotation, you can still use this for Victor Frankenstein. It's absolutely fine. If a quotation is said about someone, Mary Shelley is using it to refer to that person. So just because Walton says this, you can use it in an essay about Victor because it's about Victor. And obviously, this idea, the glorious spirit, it's a metaphor for how highly Walton sees Victor. And it's also this idea of the similarity between Walton and Victor as both kind of upper class, both very arrogant. You know, everything we've seen in the previous kind of 160 pages of Frankenstein has shown nothing to suggest that Victor is a glorious spirit. He's somebody who creates and plays around with life, sees life as a plaything, is so horrified by what he's created he refuses to look after it, and then his death is perhaps justice served at the end of the novel by Mary Shelley for what he's done. So this glorious spirit, you know, Walton is also kind of arrogant because he's endangering his crew in the way that Victor did as well. We've also got this idea of, you know, thinking kind of glorious. You've got all this almost kind of glorious spirit. Spirit obviously often used in religion. This idea of religious imagery. Used to refer to Victor, shows a couple of things. It shows Walton's misplaced loyalty to Victor. So, you know, Victor's arrogant, and to be honest, Walton eventually turns around. You know, they do turn around, the ice thaws, and they do kind of turn home, but only because his crew have forced him to mutiny. And previously, Victor has actually told his crew to carry on towards certain death, towards the North Pole. So Walton mistakenly sees him as this. You could also talk about this kind of spirit as well, potentially this kind of, you know, you've got kind of good or evil spirits there, this idea of an evil spirit to do what Victor has done. To do what Victor has done in the novel, to create and reject life, that's not human behaviour. We are predestined to look after people. And it almost ties in with this idea of some of the literary allusion in Frankenstein. You've got kind of reference to Paradise Lost, this idea of kind of Satan, the fallen angel. So Satan in Paradise Lost, you know, in the Bible we see Satan as the devil. In Paradise Lost, Satan was one of God's angels and fell, wanted too much kind of power, in the same way that Victor Frankenstein wanted too much power in the novel and was punished as a result as well. And when we're looking at context for this as well, you know, it's this idea of the moral punishment for playing God. Walton actually refers to the untimely extinction of this glorious spirit here, and you could use this idea of the extinction as well, but this idea of a spirit, you know, thinking about spirits as well, often tend to be from the realms of heaven, but Victor destined to life in hell as religious and moral punishment for his crimes. And you've also got that natural element as well, this idea that, you've committed crimes against nature, so you will be punished threefold. First of all, by God. You'll be punished by society, by kind of judgment by others who know about that, and you'll also be punished, from the natural world as well, kind of nature. As we see throughout the novel, the romantic movement, nature often conspires against Victor in Frankenstein as well, to kind of turn against him. And this idea that Shelley could be presenting a warning to scientists like Victor, and her warning could be that if you play with life, if you sport with life, if you create life, this will be your punishment. And if we think about this word spirit, this idea potentially by the end of the novel, I'm going over here now for a bit, by the end of the novel, Victor, humanity has been removed through the death of his family. Death or murder, in some cases, of his family. So just spirit remains. So Mary Shelley, I would argue, deliberately kills and murders through the creature each and every one of Victor's family. It's not just a case of, Victor dies and he gets punished for what he's done. Actually, what happens is that this idea that Victor is left as a spirit, there's nothing human of him at the end of Frankenstein, because every single one of his family have been slowly killed, and that will have a massive psychological impact. Massive psychological impact on Victor's character, as it would do on any human being, regardless of what they've done before. And so by the end of the novel, as the ultimate punishment, the moral punishment for what Victor has done, he's just left as a spirit, a kind of, almost this spirit wandering the earth as the creature kind of becomes by the end of the novel, because any trace of what makes him a human has been completely removed through the murder of his family. So what you've got there is you've got an essay plan on Victor Frankenstein. The only thing that's remaining now, these would obviously be, fairly reasonable paragraphs to write up. You're probably talking, if you were to do them in detail, focusing on some of these ideas in context and analysing in depth, you're probably talking about 3/4 of a side to a side for each one. That is the length we would want you to do in your exam. Obviously, one or two of them might be longer or shorter, and that's fine. We expect that. You might get a really good extract where you get one or two good quotations, and obviously, if you've got an extract from the middle of the novel, for instance, that might get rid of this middle paragraph altogether because you've done it, and you might talk about your beginning and your end. But what you're going to do with this now is you've got this essay plan. You're going to learn it, gradually. When you've got a Kipping class, and if the Kip question's on Victor, or if you're doing a revision question at home, right, use this essay plan. Okay, what's at the beginning of Frankenstein? This is the beginning of Frankenstein. Why is it there? What does Mary Shelley do? How does she do it? Why does she do it? Linking in those wider ideas as well. 1, 2, 3, and then give yourself an extract to do as well. You can do your extract first. I would probably get you to do the extract first in the exam, because what you'll find is you've probably analysed in quite a lot of detail in your extract. It tends to be easier when the quotations are there. In future sessions like this, we're going to go through, as during lockdown, how to answer a past paper question. And please remember, these are just 1, 2, 3 quotations to learn, because you're going to get 2 in the exam. We're going to do 1 for the creature, so there will be more to learn, but please don't worry if you prefer different quotations from beginning, middle and end. The only reason I do this is to show you what you need to do with those quotations. I would really like to see from year 11 as many different ones as possible being used, but don't feel like you can't use these, because they're there for you, obviously, but they're an answer, not necessarily the right answer. There are about 270 of you, and you could all have a go at this essay in different ways with different quotations, slightly different points, and still come out with high grades. So it's just not about what you do, it's about the quality and level of your analysis. The bits purple and orange really in this essay that are going to get you those high marks. So have a go at these essay plans. This is going to be set as an assignment for you on Microsoft Teams. So you need to submit this. You can either bring your essay plans in person. We're not getting you to do this just for the sake of doing it. What you're doing by doing this is you've actually written your essay plan on Frankenstein. We've got the creatures to do, and you've done most of the key characters in Frankenstein there. So you've actually done a little bit of this and some of this as well. And then what you can do then, take your essay plans when you're doing KIPS, when you're revising, and for stage 3, right, 45 minutes, turn this into an essay on Frankenstein as well. But please come and ask either myself or anyone in the English department if you're not sure, and we look forward to reading through your essay.